Betrayal, lies, secrets exposed. Think your relationship is perfect? Think again. Get ready for a wild ride. Like and subscribe and enjoy this story. Sarah, annoyance laced into the word, the same annoyance that had been buzzing inside my skull all morning. My phone calls went straight to voicemail. Again. For the third bloody time in the last hour. Sure, she was busy, and the whole major project launch meant late nights, but this was starting to feel calculated. Like I wasn't even a blip on her radar anymore. A chill ran down my back, an uneasy mix of anger and something I wasn't ready to name. Hey, babe, sorry. Sarah's text eventually popped up, the babe feeling tacked on for good measure. Things went sideways here. Back ASAP. As if that explained anything. Back when? Today? This week? I shot off a curt, fine, fighting the urge to add a dozen question marks. This back and forth was a new low. The Sarah I remembered would have at least pretended to feel an ounce of guilt about being unreachable. 15 years together, 3 kids, a house in the kind of suburb where neighbors waved hello and kids rode bikes in the cul-de-sac. On paper, it was the picture of perfect. But lately? It felt more like an empty shell of what it once was. The office hummed around me, but I barely registered the chatter of coworkers or my overflowing inbox. Something with Sarah was off. Big time. The new perfume, the sudden obsession with her appearance. It wasn't just middle-aged restlessness. The gnawing feeling in my gut said otherwise. I glanced at the clock, nearly noon. An idea sparked, a desperate, crazy idea. Hey, Brian. Can you cover me for like, an hour? Client thing. I lied to my cubicle mate. Sure thing, man. Lunch date? He winked. If only he knew what my lunch plans actually entailed. It wasn't outright stalking, more like concerned observation. Sarah's office building was the generic glass and steel kind, smack dab in the downtown core. Casually strolling by felt out of place, like a spy wannabe, which I guess, in a sad way, I was. After a few loops around the block, that damn feeling of dread deepened. There she was, emerging from the lobby, but not alone. Some guy I'd never seen before, suit crisp, hair perfect, the kind of cocky smile that set off an instinctive dislike in me. They weren't just leaving work together, they were practically glued at the hip, laughing, her hand briefly touching his arm. Just a colleague. A bitter laugh escaped me. Liar. She never looked at me like that anymore. The rest of the day passed in a haze of half-finished reports and increasingly worried thoughts. I had to confront her, but playing it cool seemed the smarter option. Ambush felt wrong. What I needed was proof, something more solid than a gut feeling and some lunchtime rendezvous. Driving home, I weighed my options. It felt pathetic, something guys in bad movies did, but the sickening suspicion festering inside me made me desperate. Private investigator. I scoffed at the thought, then immediately started searching online. This was nuts. Had our marriage really devolved into this? My hands were shaking as I tore open the credit card statement. We'd always been sensible with money, so the out-of-the-ordinary charge screamed at me. A designer boutique she'd never mentioned, in a part of town we rarely ventured to. It was a piece of the puzzle, a stupid, insignificant piece, but somehow it made the whole mess feel concrete. She wasn't just spending late nights at the office, she was spending my hard-earned cash too. Anger, the seething hot kind, took over. So much for the happily ever after we'd promised each other under the wedding arch. I slammed a fist down on the kitchen counter, startling myself with the force of it. Decisions had to be made, this couldn't just fester. But what the hell did you do when the woman you thought you knew turned out to be a stranger? The words, private investigator, flashed through my mind. Images from trashy crime shows popped up. Seedy figures lurking in alleys, exorbitant prices. It wasn't me. It wasn't the kind of guy the first was. Or was it? The unease had clawed at me for months. Now it was an all-consuming hunger for the truth, no matter how ugly. A few agonizing hours and some frantic internet searches later, I found myself in a cramped office, across from a man named Rick who looked about as trustworthy as a used car salesman. But his price was surprisingly reasonable, and my need for answers was overwhelming. Just want documentation, I insisted. Photos, whatever proves. Proves she's a lying cheater. The words hung in the air. 3 days. That's how long it took. 3 days of forced normalcy, work meetings, packing the kids' lunches, Sarah breezy and distant as ever. while I secretly waited for the other shoe to drop. The email from Rick arrived with the subject line, "Information attached." My heart pounded hard enough to crack a rib. The photos were blurry, taken from a distance, but there was no mistaking them. Sarah with the suit guy, laughing by candlelight in some dimly lit bar. A kiss. A freaking kiss. It felt like reality tilting on its axis. The next morning, I confronted her. The cool, calm husband act crumbled before I even opened my mouth. She saw it in my eyes, the fury masking the hurt. Denials were useless. When I produced the photos, Sarah's face went white as a sheet. This doesn't mean anything, she stammered. The lie was pathetic. The fight was brutal. Words flew like shrapnel, accusations, tears, the death rattle of whatever trust remained between us. I stormed out, needing space, needing to think without exploding right there in our pristine kitchen. As I drove, my mind raced. There was a sick satisfaction in being right, but mostly it was a crushing sense of loss. Emily, Sarah's oldest friend, popped into my head. The woman had always been nice enough, but with a hint of disapproval I'd never fully understood. Desperation fueled an insane gamble. Emily, I know this is weird, but can we meet? Coffee, something? It's about Sarah. To her credit, she didn't hesitate. Later that night, we sat in a corner booth at a diner. Emily's eyes spoke volumes even before the words came. She wasn't shocked, just disappointed. Sadly disappointed. And yeah, I was pretty damn ashamed of myself for needing her to confirm what I already knew. The affair wasn't some fleeting mistake, but a months-long ordeal. My gut instinct had been screaming the truth all along, and I'd blindly ignored it. Fury reignited, but with a cold focus now. I wouldn't be some sad sack letting himself get played. This was about more than catching Sarah out, it was about taking back control. So, tell me about this big project. Sounds like it's really got you excited. The words tasted sickly sweet in my mouth, a phony act of concerned husband, while I mentally catalogued the lies embedded in her response. After our explosive confrontation, an eerie calm had settled over the house. I faked normalcy, becoming the doting husband, suggesting date nights, surprising Sarah with small gifts, all while a twisted plan took shape in my head. This wasn't about winning her back. This was about power, about making damn sure I wasn't the only fool in this equation. Her phone became my obsession. When she thought I wasn't looking, I'd subtly check it, deleted text threads, late-night calls with unknown numbers. Each hushed conversation, each furtive glance at the screen, chipped away another piece of my sanity. I documented it all. Screenshots, call logs, a sickening timeline of betrayal. Rick, the pie, was my secret weapon. He gave their slimy rendezvous schedule. Tuesdays at a swanky hotel bar frequented by business types, Friday lunches under the guise of networking. It was predictable, and that made it exploitable. I needed more than proof of the affair. I needed to break their smug little bubble. The target wasn't just Sarah anymore. It was him, the smug pretty boy who thought he could waltz into my life and take what he wanted. More surveillance, focused now on Mr. Investment Banker. His type was easy to read. Flashy car, expensive gym, a weakness for the high life. It didn't take long to infiltrate. One casual, "Hey, mind if I join?" at the gym turned into buddy-buddy post-workout beers, then an invite into his world. Exclusive clubs and overpriced cocktails. David was cocky, sure, but he was also hungry, eager to impress. His world reeked of privilege and shallow ambition, everything I'd always prided myself in not being. The seed was planted. A whispered suggestion of a friendly poker game, just some guys blowing off steam. He bit hard. It started small. Letting him win a few rounds whetted his appetite, his overconfidence growing with each hand. I played him perfectly, the concerned friend, the oblivious Mark. Then came the big night. Not in some smoky room, but at my place, with catered food and the illusion of good-natured fun. The stakes escalated, quietly urged on by me. David got sloppy, reckless, exactly what I wanted him to be. By the time he realized how deep in he was, it was too late. Just a little IOU, buddy. No big deal, right? My smile hid the cold satisfaction burning inside. He owed me. Big. The confrontation wasn't what I expected. No threats, no shouting match. He was cornered, and he knew it. His face went pale when I outlined the terms of repayment. The affair ends, immediately, or his debt gets shared with some very unsavory characters I'd fabricated. He sputtered some crap about love, about Sarah being different. Then, I laid out one of the photos from Rick, proof that his precious love was nothing but lies. He crumbled. The smug grin was replaced by something resembling fear. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't noble, but damn if it didn't feel good. Power, it turned out, was a hell of a drug. I went for the slow burn. No hysterics, no thrown dishes. Instead, I let Sarah bask in the phony normalcy I'd created. While she was at work, I gathered it all in a plain manila envelope. The photos, the credit card statements with her fancy purchases circled in red, even a timeline of her lies pieced together from her texts and calls. Leaving it on the kitchen island was oddly satisfying. A little bomb, waiting to explode our picture-perfect life into a million shattered pieces. The wait was almost delicious. Imagining her face when she opened it, the startled expression turning into comprehension, then the inevitable panic. She didn't disappoint. When she got home that night, she found the envelope. Her whole body went rigid, and denial didn't even flash across her face. The carefully constructed mask dropped, replaced with a fear that was grimly satisfying. I can explain, Sarah started, her voice barely a whisper. I don't want to hear it, I cut her off. Explanations mean nothing. You've had months to come clean, but you chose lies. My voice remained eerily calm, fueled by disgust now more than outright anger. The confrontation was brutal, a torrent of accusations and choked back sobs. The woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, revealed herself as a selfish, hollow stranger. There were pleas for forgiveness, promises that it would never happen again, but her words were hollow, devoid of any genuine remorse. And then, like a punch to the gut, my mind landed on the kids. How the hell do you explain to children that their mother, their role model, blew up their world on a whim? The thought squeezed my heart with an icy grip, worse than all of Sarah's betrayals. Pack a bag. You're leaving, I said finally, and even I was surprised at my own coldness. The following days were a blur of logistics and stifled pain. Lawyers were called. A temporary separation was agreed upon. For the sake of the kids, we spun a tale of a work opportunity that required Sarah to be away. The charade choked me. Support came from surprising places. Emily, of course, was solidly in my corner. But even Sarah's parents, always the picture of reserved politeness, couldn't hide their disappointment in their daughter. It was a small mercy in the storm of my own emotions. Our house, once a haven, became a war zone. The kids reacted with a confusing mix of anger and bewilderment. Each bedtime filled with tears, each morning laced with tension, was another cut to my already bleeding soul. The instinct to protect my children warred with the simmering rage at the woman who'd caused this. Through it all, I moved like an automaton. Work became a necessary distraction, the normalcy of spreadsheets and meetings a bizarre lifeline. My nights were filled with restless sleep, haunted by images of Sarah and him, twisting the knife of betrayal a little deeper each time. The man who'd orchestrated this whole mess was nothing but a ghost, his debt settled, our paths unlikely to cross again. Yet, even the small victory felt tainted. This wasn't healing, it was barely surviving. They make you lie on a couch, you know, like in the movies. Brian's failed attempt at a joke fell flat. His sympathetic smile did little to ease the knot in my stomach as I stood outside the therapist's office. Cliché? Absolutely. Desperate? Without question. I'd scoffed at the idea at first, but the relentless cycle of anger and sleepless nights chipped away at me. Something had to give if I wanted to be even a halfway decent father, let alone a functioning human being. The first session was a blur, stilted answers, dredging up memories I'd rather shove back down. But beneath the awkwardness, the therapist honed in on the thing I'd been avoiding the most, the damn lingering love. It wasn't about wanting Sarah back, but about the twisted remnants of a connection that mocked the betrayal. The divorce proceedings dragged on. Months of legal wrangling, where every possession, every shared memory, got dissected and assigned a monetary value. Our once cozy home became a battleground, with lawyers replacing friendly dinners. The whole thing was a sickening spectacle, a constant reminder of how thoroughly we'd failed. And then, one gray Wednesday evening, she showed up. Unannounced. Sarah, standing on the doorstep that had been hers just weeks ago. Her makeup was smudged, eyes red. No demands, no more manipulations. Just tears. Raw, choked back sobs. An apology. That's the word that hung heavy in the air. Not a plea to take her back, just an acknowledgement of the destruction she'd caused. It didn't erase a damn thing, but a tiny flicker of something like pity stirred within me, an odd counterpart to the lingering resentment. The kids, our innocent victims in this mess. We'd shielded them for as long as possible, but the tense silences and forced cheer spoke volumes. They were teenagers, not idiots. Sitting them down, finding the words to break their world yet again, was hands down the hardest thing I've ever done. Their reactions were a sucker punch. Anger from Jake, silent tears from Cassie, and an emptiness in my own chest that threatened to swallow me whole. Yet, even amidst the pain, something shifted. Sarah and I, for the first time in ages, shared a common goal: protecting the kids. Custody was split, visitation schedules meticulously negotiated. Company parenting became the buzzword, along with new ground rules and a mutual, if unspoken, agreement. Our crap didn't get to consume their world any more than it already had. The fresh start was a lonely one. She moved into a tiny, characterless apartment. I stayed in our house, now oversized and filled with echoes. Ghosts of happier times whispered through the empty rooms, making sleep even more elusive. Healing wasn't a straight line, that much became brutally clear. One day, I'd feel a flicker of calm, then some damn song on the radio would trigger a gut-wrenching wave of anger. Dr. What's-Her-Face assured me this was normal, part of the messy process. I hated how damn right she was. The wound of Sarah's betrayal lingered, a dull ache that probably would never fully fade. New relationships, if you could even call them that, felt forced, awkward. The fear of another person holding that kind of destructive power over me was suffocating. But then, there were moments. Tucking Cassie in, and her sleepy smile mirroring her younger self. Watching Jake hit a home run, his grin wide and carefree. In those moments, the anger and hurt dimmed, just a bit. I wasn't whole, maybe never would be. But the quiet resolve grew a little stronger each day. Resolve to be a good father, and maybe, just maybe, to find a way to build a life worth living out of the wreckage. Silence can be an odd thing. It can be peaceful, the kind you find at the end of a long hike or cradling a warm cup of coffee in the pre-dawn hush. But the silence that settled over our house after Sarah left wasn't like that. It pressed inwards, heavy and accusatory, echoing with the absence of her footsteps, her nervous laughter, the bickering with the kids that had once seemed like the soundtrack of family life. At first, it was deafening. Then, gradually, a strange kind of freedom crept in. Sleep came more easily, uninterrupted by the tossing and turning that had marked our final months together. Forgotten hobbies resurfaced. A half-finished model train set in the basement, dusty guitar strings that still held their tune. Tentatively, I embraced these distractions, savoring the ability to focus on something, anything, other than the mess my life had become. The kids' weekends were mine now. Time with them should have been a balm, but their questions tore at scabs I was desperate to let heal. Why can't mommy live with us anymore? Jake's voice, usually so full of mischief, held a vulnerable tremor that squeezed my heart. Explaining adult failures in an age-appropriate way felt like an impossible, cruel task. Work became my safe haven. I buried myself in projects, volunteered for late shifts, welcomed the mental exhaustion that warded off intrusive memories at night. The concerned looks from Brian and my team initially prompted a flicker of guilt, but I brushed it aside. Numbing myself felt preferable to actually feeling anything at all. Of course, the whispers started. Gossip, a small town's lifeblood, found its way back to me through concerned clients and well-meaning busybodies. Half-truths swirled. A messy divorce, whispers of infidelity, her infidelity, never mine, as if that somehow lessened it, pitying looks that pricked at my carefully constructed armor. The worst were the run-ins. Sarah at the grocery store, her forced smile faltering when she saw me. Tense hellos at Cassie's ballet recital. Each encounter, however brief, sent a tremor of unease through me, twisting the knife of betrayal just a little bit further. And then, the invitations started. Women I barely knew, acquaintances whose names eluded me, suddenly saw me as available. A clumsy offer of a home-cooked meal, a fumbled suggestion for drinks, it was a mix of pathetic and flattering. Part of me, the lonely part, craved the attention. But another, deeper part recoiled from the prospect of faking my way through a date, of pretending I was emotionally ready for whatever came next. Amidst the hollow ache, There was a small, solid comfort. The bond blossoming between the kids and my parents. They stepped in, providing stability and the unconditional love that Sarah and I had so spectacularly failed to offer. Watching them laugh with Jake, their eyes filled with adoration Cassie desperately craved, brought a mix of gratitude and a pang of guilt about the family I'd broken. The fallout of our split was messy, multi-layered. I was navigating a minefield of loneliness, bitterness, and a persistent fear of what the future held. Would I always be this hollowed-out version of myself? The question lingered, casting a long shadow over my fragile attempts at moving on. The tie was wrong, too formal, too damn constricting for what was supposed to be a casual coffee date thing. But standing in front of the mirror, I couldn't bring myself to take it off. Some pathetic part of me wanted to appear pulled together, proof that I wasn't completely wrecked by the whole divorce mess. Months had passed, and Emily's gentle prodding finally broke through my resistance. A blind date. The term alone made me cringe. But it had been so long, maybe the forced interaction would be a good kick in the pants, a harsh reminder that the world kept spinning even as mine felt stuck in a rut. Cute place, Sarah. That's what Emily called her. Cute, bubbly, recently divorced too. Supposedly, we had common ground. The date itself was more like a cringeworthy job interview. Awkward questions, stilted laughter, me mentally tallying every reason why this woman, perfectly nice but a terrible match, wasn't going to become the great new hope in my sad love life. Even worse than the date itself was the aftermath. An insistent text asking about a second one? Hell no. The pitying look from Emily a few days later? That hurt more than I cared to admit. Apparently, re-entering the dating scene after 15 years of coupledom made me about as desirable as last week's soggy leftovers. Support group? Are you serious? I scoffed at my therapist. But desperation had a way of knocking down your stubborn pride. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting in a circle of strangers, all of us bearing the invisible scars of broken relationships. The first session was mostly introductions, each story like a fresh stab wound. Yet, as the weeks progressed, a strange solidarity formed. Shared tears, awkward jokes, the simple recognition that you're not alone in your messed upness. It was a balm my lonely soul desperately needed. Then, she started showing up at places where I shouldn't have been surprised to see her but was nonetheless. Sarah at the grocery store, hair pulled back messily, a weariness etched onto her face. At Jake's soccer game, her cheers less enthusiastic than I remembered, the carefully cultivated image of the past replaced by something a bit less shiny. Did I imagine the flicker of sorrow in her eyes, or was it just wishful thinking on my part? Were these glimpses of genuine remorse, or simply a new tactic in whatever game she was still playing? Our anniversary, a day I'd always made a big deal of, rolled around. Instead of wallowing, I packed up the kids, and we drove to the beach. Building sandcastles, chasing waves, their laughter, it felt like a defiant act of healing, a conscious choice to create a new memory untainted by the past. The package on my doorstep threw me. Inside, nothing but a stack of old photos. Us on our honeymoon, laughing on a blurry, out-of-focus hike years ago, the kids as babies. No note, no overt plea for a second chance, just proof of a happier time. It messed with my head. Was this a gesture of apology, or just another cruel reminder of all we'd lost? The forgiveness question wouldn't leave me alone. Dr. What's-Her-Face kept poking at it, insisting it wasn't about condoning Sarah's actions, but about freeing myself from the poison of resentment. The idea made me want to hurl, but as the days turned into weeks, it nagged at me. Forgiveness, not as a grand gesture, but as a slow, begrudging release of the anger that was eating me from the inside out. A year. It had been only a year, but it felt like a lifetime. The initial rawness of betrayal had dulled, but the ache was still there. Sarah had settled into her new life. The kids seemed to be adjusting as well as could be expected. As for me, I was treading water, not quite drowning anymore but not exactly swimming towards a bright future either. Survival mode. That was my new normal. I swore that spotting him wouldn't ruin my day. Yet, there was David, smug as ever, grabbing a latte in the cafe near my office. Every instinct screamed at me to go full-on confrontation mode, remind him how his cocky little world had imploded. But something flickered deep inside, not rage this time, but a strange sense of pity. He didn't know. Sarah's name never crossed my lips when I laid out the blackmail trap. In his mind, he probably chalked up his financial woes to a bad gamble, a run of lousy luck. The urge to gloat, to reveal my role in his downfall, was surprisingly absent. Petty revenge, however satisfying momentarily, held no real appeal anymore. He was insignificant, a pathetic footnote in my story, not the villain I'd once cast him as. Months had passed without significant contact with Sarah. Short texts about the kids, strained pleasantries at handover, a fragile pretense of civility for their sake. Then came the message. Can we talk? Coffee? Caution warred with curiosity. Was this another manipulation, a veiled attempt to worm her way back in? Yet, something in the tone was different. Resigned, almost. Against every sensible instinct, I texted back a simple, sure. The cafe was neutral territory, neither of our haunts. Her appearance shocked me. Less polished Sarah, more worn. The apology was genuine, not a grand production, but an acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, the broken trust, the recklessness. She didn't ask for a do-over, or even forgiveness. An explanation, yes. A glimpse into a restlessness I never truly understood, and which no longer really mattered. Did I believe her? Not entirely, but I didn't need to. This meeting wasn't about rekindled love, it was about releasing the past's stranglehold on the present. There was a strange kind of closure in that, a loosening of the knot in my chest that had been there far too long. Walking away, I felt lighter. Not joyful by any means, but unburdened in a way I didn't expect. Life was starting to open up in surprising ways. Lunch with a work colleague, Sarah, yes, another one named Sarah, turned into a surprisingly pleasant afternoon. There was a spark there, different from the explosive chemistry with my ex-wife, yet intriguing in its own tentative way. Then came the big one, the hurdle I wasn't sure I could clear, the kids' approval. It turns out they're a lot sharper than we give them credit for. Jake, with his newfound teenage cynicism, rolled his eyes, but there was an underlying relief in his voice. Cassie smiled, a real smile that warmed me to my core. Their blessing, however cautious, gave me the green light to let new possibilities in. Do I believe in fairy tale happy endings anymore? Honestly, no. The scars from Sarah's betrayal run too deep for that. But the tentative joy I find in spending time with Sarah, the new one, the way my heart seems a bit less guarded, it's something. It's a hesitant step into a future that doesn't feel so bleak anymore. Life, as I've painfully learned, isn't about neat resolutions. The ending of this chapter isn't a triumphant finale, but rather the flickering hope of something different, perhaps something better. And that, for now, is more than enough. The biggest lesson of all this? I might have been shattered, but I'm not broken. Turns out, the decision to rebuild rests entirely in my hands. Let me know if this is going in the direction you wanted, or should things take a darker turn? It started with small things. Texts that weren't strictly about the kids. Hope you're doing well, after a particularly rough day at work. Innocuous if they came from anyone else, but with Sarah, every gesture felt loaded, forcing me to dissect the hidden meaning. Part of me, the cynical part honed by betrayal, saw a calculated move. A play to soften me up, to reassert herself into my life. Dr. What's-Her-Face, ever the optimist, suggested otherwise. Maybe Sarah, finally facing the consequences of her actions, was making genuine amends. Maybe people do change. The notion seemed absurd, yet a traitorous flicker of hope ignited within me. Her focus on Sarah, the other Sarah, the new woman I'd been hesitantly dating, added fuel to the fire. She seems lovely, Sarah commented after a Cassie ballet recital, a genuine smile warming her eyes. Was it support, or a subtle attempt to remind me what I'd lost? I spent sleepless nights analyzing, the line between cautious optimism and jaded suspicion blurring beyond recognition. Co-parenting, once a strained battlefield, became surprisingly functional. There was still distance, but the outright hostility had faded. Sarah at the kitchen table sorting out school schedules felt almost normal. Seeing her laugh at Jake's silly joke sent a pang through me, a longing for the easy connection we'd once shared. Then came the evening I'll never forget. Cassie's dance competition, a logistical nightmare Sarah and I tackled together. In the post-show chaos, amidst lost costumes and teary-eyed kids, we shared a laugh. A real, genuine laugh, the first in what felt like a lifetime. Later, driving her home, the silence wasn't accusatory but comfortable. At her doorstep, a lingering glance, a hesitant touch. It was like gravity was pulling us back together, despite every logical cell in my brain screaming at me to run. The tentative, How about coffee, then? Almost slipped out before I caught myself. Yet, the question lingered in the air between us, unspoken but undeniably present. Could this work? A second chance built not on youthful passion but on shared scars, on the painful wisdom we'd both gained? The potential payoff was huge, a love deeper and more resilient than the naive version we'd shattered. Yet, the downside was catastrophic. Another betrayal, a second shattering that might just break me beyond repair. The kids' reactions threw me off balance further. They'd picked up on the shift, not overtly, but in the way kids intuit these things. Jake was suspicious, wary of his mom's sudden attentiveness. Cassie, ever the hopeless romantic, seemed to root for this strange reconciliation, her eyes shining with a hope that both thrilled and terrified me. The whole thing was a gamble, a throw of the dice where the stakes felt impossibly high. My cautious steps towards Sarah were filled with an intoxicating mix of longing and dread. This wasn't some rom-com do-over. It was walking a tightrope in the aftermath of a hurricane, hoping that this time, the fall wouldn't be quite so deadly.